Welcome to Vermont Artists and Authors, where we interview great storytellers and artists from the amazing Green Mountain State. This is episode 10. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the inspirational and acclaimed writer, illustrator, teacher, and Pushcart Prize nominee, Eva Zimet. Eva, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Barney.
Yeah, you're welcome. So this is good. So you put out here. So right now, as of the last couple of years, you have a children's book and a highly acclaimed book on poetry. So we'll be excited to talk about each one of those individually. But first, do you want to kind of give our viewers and also our listeners who might be driving in a car and listening to this podcast a little bit of background about yourself and how you got into writing your works?
Yeah, sure. It's an indirect path. I consider, the history of how I got to where I am as a practice, and I see my work as a practice. Even the products, even the product of a book. The book is a tangible product, but language is not. It's something that is collaborative with the reader and has a life of its own, a lot like I have a performance background, and I tend to approach writing that way, as a performance that will occur whenever you open the book. I had early training. My mother was a painter, and she taught me a lot about drawing and painting. And I have written for most of my life. So when the publisher, I was signed on as an editor in a small hybrid publishing house here in Vermont, and we got to talking, and it turned out I had a bunch of poems, and he said, "Is it enough to make a collection?" And it was. So that's how that happened. And with the children's book that I illustrated, I've got a bunch of children, and we would draw together all the time. And I would start doodling these pictures of my own memory, from my own memory of the ballet world.
I think you mentioned so you're also teach tango. Was this the impetus of this storyline, or how did you sit down and say, listen, I'm going to make this book called Lucy Dancer? What was how did that creation phase happen for you?
So that's a really good question. It's a story, going back to the practice, the idea of practice. The story of Lucy Dancer is more or less, it's based on a true story. We can say that. And the subject of Lucy Dancer comes to ballet reluctantly, and then she finds in it something, a connection, a joy, a comfort, a connection that keeps her in it and allows her to manage somehow the life outside of dancing. And that was true for me too. And it's not really an exaggeration for me to say that ballet saved my life. And in that way, I wanted to tell the story of what it is to find a practice that will be something that can sustain you. Find a community that is something that will sustain you. And that's what happened to this young dancer in the story, Lucy. And it happens to many people who find a community and a practice that sustains them. It's healing, right. And at times art is life-saving. And I like to try to emphasize that. So tango came much later.
Okay. So this book was published in 2019, correct?
Yep.
This came out in 2019. So how did it work for you how did you get your book published? Because you actually did it this isn't self-published. You connected with a rootstock publishing, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
So what happened was I was in conversation with the head of this organization, Rootstock Publishing, and we were talking about me being an editor for them, and we were talking about many things. And he said, "Oh, can I also see the pictures that you've got for this story that you're telling me you have?" And so I brought them our next meeting, and he said, "Ooh, wow, I would like to publish this." So it was already, almost a dummy, a mock-up for being a children's book, and we just polished it and got it published.
So tell me about Rootstock Publishing then.
Yeah, Rootstock Publishing is a hybrid publisher. The author pays part of the portion of the production price, and gets to, in exchange for that, gets to retain more rights, I suppose, than otherwise. I also got the added benefit of being able to write and illustrate my book, which is really not often the case in children's book. In traditional children's book publishing, the author is one thing, then the publisher, it's their job to find an illustrator. And that's part of the reason why I was holding out for so long, because I wanted to be, because, it's ballet, there are not a lot of people who draw ballet in a way that I approve of. It's not horrible. It's the snobby part of ballet.
So I said there's a lot of good reviews on there. Was that the heavy lifting to get that book out to reviewers? Was that on your side, or or did the publishing house do that for you?
No, it's more on my side than
Okay.
anything. That is the other deal with hybrid publisher, is that more of the promotional burden falls on the author. And I haven't been connected with the ballet world for years and years, so I just went to the people in the dance world that I knew, and some of them had ballet backgrounds as I did, so they
Right.
knew what they were looking at, and so it worked out.
Right. So let me ask you then, when you're putting this together, what's the thing you're excited about, and what's the thing that you consider more of the chore? Is like, do you consider yourself a writer who does art, or do you consider yourself an artist that writes?
That's really hard to say, because I haven't really hit a professional stride in
Hmm.
the drawing and illustrating part. So professionally, I would say I'm a writer more than an illustrator, but I've always done both.
Right.
And so in my collection of poetry, I have these itsy bitsy little line drawings that are pen and ink, which is what in Lucy Dancer, that's what I started with, is line drawings, and then I did watercolor over that. And ordinarily, I would just do the line drawing. Neither one is a chore or a burden. That comes in promotion.
Some as a dancer as well, and also as a writer and an artist, you have the passive art form. If someone's not watching you dance, you're still dancing. So there's that passive art form what's still happening, where the active art form of reading a book, the book doesn't read itself. You have to actively be engaged in that book. Do you see there's a different expectation on the different art forms, to where that the audience is going to be, that there's the engagement of your audience is determined based off of the genre itself?
It's a fascinating idea that I will not be able to answer quickly. But no, it's a really, really interesting. What is the experience of the collaboration? Because in a book, it will sit there until it's read.
Hmm.
or somebody reads it to you, and then the listener will have the experience, and they'll also have the experience in memory, and also have the experience in rereading it, or telling somebody else about it. Once the experience has been had, it can repeat. It will never repeat quite the same. And in performing arts, it is even more like that. There's never any two performances that are alike. And even if you're watching something that is recorded that was a performance, then you get back into the same thing. The viewer has a new experience every time. So in many ways, it's the same. Dancing might be a little more public. I love writing because it is so personal. I mean, intimate.
Right.
A single pair of eyes or a single pair of, however you're experiencing it, will have that. And in dancing, there are the dancers. It might be a whole audience, and it's a little bit more of a group experience.
And so talk to us a bit now about chatting about your children's book. And we'll talk
Mhm.
about your poetry in a little bit. What's the style itself? Are you someone that will work on a digital? Is it watercolor or
Yeah,
just
it's
the
watercolor.
process?
It went the process of turning it into a children's book. Committee decision was made to saturate the colors, and then it went to a digital artist who, in the finished work, there's saturated yellow backgrounds, saturated blue backgrounds, and
Okay.
the color just pops. They did their best to retain my watercolor effect, but you have to look for it,
Right.
in the published book. So what I do is I do the line drawing. I don't trace. I That was trained out of me by my mother, who is a professional artist, and
Yeah.
um, she wouldn't let me, as a child, she wouldn't let me use erasers, and she wouldn't let me trace, and she wouldn't let me draw from photographs. Um, I mean, it's not that she wouldn't let me. She just was clearly extremely disparaging about those techniques. And so what I did for the book, is I drew them in drafts until I got one that came out the way I wanted it.
Hmm.
So I would always draw it freehand with no pencil underneath, and no tracing, so that it would be as dynamic and as much of mimicking the dance itself as it could
Okay.
be.
So you sent to the publisher storyboard like that sketch, and then that's when they use the digital artist to
No,
add their.
I continued to refine the
Okay.
the the
All right.
pictures, and then I did the watercolor on top of them, and the digital artist did the solid saturated background.
I see. So I'm really curious now. So like that initial step, that sketch there, where did you take a watercolor paper and then type out the words, or
No, but I placed them.
okay, all
I've
right,
got Photoshop too. So
okay, okay, all
so
right, all
so
right.
I did as much as I could. In fact, I even used a font that my son created,
Oh wow.
because he does that. He's a font designer. And so it's set in NCT Torin. That was his name for this particular font. So you featured his font, and I set the text on the pictures, and then
Okay,
really all the digital artist added was the saturated behind the text color. Like
okay.
in the one we're looking at, it's this mustard yellow.
So what was your because it was through publishing, but plus you said it was like a hybrid, not really self-publishing and not really publishing house. It was this hybrid. How much of a say did you have on the digital artists when they put in that mustard yellow? Did you say great or no, or they said,
I
how did that
I
work?
had I had some meetings with her, and we hammered it out.
So it was more or less kind of like a back and forth compromise thing, or did they say this will mean this is a good picture for the picture book, or how did that? Yeah.
No, I mean we used all the yeah, we kept everything that I did, the order of everything, all my illustrations, we kept that. My setting the type and
Mm,
placing the blocks of text. And for instance, in this one, the digital artist split the green background down the middle.
okay.
That that was one of her more, creative additions. There were ones where I had a glow, a glow around the character, um, and goes with the text.
Mm,
At one point of concentration, an artist really gets in a zone, and everything just sort of vanishes around this zone.
right.
Um, and so I had a glow in making that digital was a little bit of a challenge, but she did a beautiful job on that. Um,
And and but obviously, you're happy with the product because you had Rootstock Publishing do your poetry book as well, correct?
yes, yeah, they did my poetry book as well. Who was I to say no when somebody offers to publish your stuff, right?
Right.
So that was delightful, and um, it was a little before the pandemic that
Right.
we made the deal, and then the launch was during the pandemic. But it was wonderful because I got to bring it into the world. A lot of authors um, talk about a book having a birthday
Right.
a year after the launch, and I can see why, because it really feels as if you're incubating something for a very long time, and then it comes into the world. Uh,
So talk to us a bit about this book. This is also available through your website. And you can get it through other major online book retailers as well, correct?
Yep, yep. Because that's a huge advantage over self-publishing. You get this ISBN number, and you get to be involved or qualify for all sorts of things that you wouldn't
Hmm.
if you were self-published, and so that's one reason to hold out for and continue grinding through those submissions, to hybrid or larger house publishers, is that they have access just solely by virtue of them being a publishing house, that a self-published author might not have.
Okay. So talk to us. What can people expect from the Lost Grip? Do you want to kind of give us a background on this one?
Yeah. So in The Lost Grip, I uh, I'm working around a theme of one's relationship to trauma,
Hmm.
and what it takes to recover from it, survive it, recover from it, and be able to move on. And that's what one can expect,
Right.
I guess. Uh, from it, it is not a downer to read this. One reviewer said that the book is not for the faint of heart, and yet it's it took many years for me to come to a place where talking about something painful is not painful for the audience. And so that's the process of recovery and moving on, that
Right.
we can. It's not exactly stand-up comedy, but which is the other place where pain just pours,
Right.
from the stage. But neither is it a brutal revisiting of trauma.
Right. And so what did you see, as you say, you mentioned that this came out, this book was already kind of written sort of before the pandemic, correct?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And did you see a lot of this as going through, for the last 14 months, we've been kind of going through our own shared trauma with everybody on this as well. Do you see any of your stories, your personal stories and poems in here resonating for people who might be experiencing shared trauma on different types of trauma, or is it more specific?
I think that it can resonate for a range of trauma, because it comes down to the feeling of being imprisoned, or the feeling of being caught, trapped, oppressed. And certainly those themes have had a lot of light shown on them recently. We're seeing light on our own history, as a country, in ways that were omitted or suppressed before, and that is a way that anybody who's experienced trauma can relate to. That the silencing
Right.
is something a lot of us can relate to, I think, and what it takes to find the voice, and to uh, acknowledge, recognize, validate, and move on.
And do you see yourself as a writer in this particular sense? Do you doing a children's book and then writing a book of poetry about trauma? What was the direction that you had to take from, say, from a not a publishing perspective, but from a marketing perspective? How easy or different was it between those two specific books?
Not so easy, and very, very different. In the children's book world is also beginning to open up, and books are being written for very young people about very difficult subjects in an accessible and age appropriate way. And I'm so happy to be seeing that. I tried to do that myself a little, with just glimpses of the Lucy's, this in the children's book, Lucy's life at home was not, it's just glimpses, and it wasn't all, roses. She wasn't, it wasn't all roses. Uh, and to be able to find something that is a bridge, and her own path. And the book of poetry, that world is also opening up to things that you could do with poetry that you couldn't, that were not published. There weren't popular before, but they're much more popular now. So there's subject matter that is more acceptable now, and there is a lot of hybrid form in poetry now, and it's also having kind of a its moment of fame. Poetry has become wildly popular in the past year, and I'm happy to be in on that.
It's interesting. So, like, as a creator, as an artist, was there ever a decision out of both stories to say, hey, this would make more sense as a children's book, or this would make more sense as a book of poetry, to say, and then also any of your other, since you've been a success in both genres, it does also give you that ability not to be kind of shoehorned into a certain type of writer, which is great right from the beginning. Do you see yourself opened up to say, hey, I might write a novel next, or I might do another children's book, or I might do another book of poetry? So, like, how many things are, how many, as they call them, the whips, the work in progresses? How much do you have
Mhm.
spinning in your background right now?
It is it's a constant practice for me to stay focused, because there's so many things that would be fun to do.
Right.
What there are children's books that are being written in verse. It's basically poetry, but it continues into a longer narrative. And so there are all these hybrid forms coming up, and it's very, very exciting. It goes with, I think, the mood of the world, that people are opening their eyes to seeing things that are not so boxed and categorized anymore. That there's a blend, there's a range of experience and relationships that we can have. So I would, if I could, write another children's book. I had a lot of ideas about what to do for that, but my focus now is more on short form poetry, haiku and those types, senryu, tanka, the haibun. There's a bunch of them, but they're all quite short form. And so, if I put another, that would be the next thing that I really like to do, if I could, is put out a book of short form poetry.
Would you do your illustrations on those?
Yeah, I think I would actually do more. There's another form of poetry that is the haiku overlaid on a picture. I could do that, or I could just illustrate with more of my line drawings. It's fun to have a home for something that I really like to do. It's just these little line drawings. It's like, oh, but that's not an oil painting. That's not real art, And it's like, yeah, it's what I do though. So it's really fun to pair all these things and find niches and homes
And
for
look,
them.
if you have other stories that you're willing, would you ever, like, if you have like an idea of like a script, or a, a children's book that you might be working on, would you say, I don't have time to write and illustrate it, and would there's ideas of reaching out to children's book illustrators, or going to, I got a good script here, would you that, or would you also be reaching out to them and say, hey, if you have somebody that's looking for an illustrator, I wouldn't mind doing that as well. Which would you be preferential? Do you like to do your own for both?
I like to do my own because I have such a visual background. There are some illustrators that I really admire, and they're probably out of my range for how for collaborating with them. But I've got a handful of illustrators I would just bow to if they wanted to do work with my writing. Um, and every now and then I think, oh, I could, and little, line drawing pictures occur to me, and I could sketch those. So uh, it would not offend me if somebody asked me to collaborate as either a writer or an illustrator.
That's great. So where can people, if they want to buy a copy of The Lost Grip or Lucy Dancer, where's the best place they can go to get that?
Your local bookshop.
There you go.
And if it's not on the shelf, ask them to order it. Local bookshops are, local things in general are struggling. And so the local bookshop here is Bear Pond Books in Montpelier, Vermont. And going to your own would be just as good. And Rootstock Publishing, of course.
And they have their list of books right there online as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. And you can check out Eva Zimet. You can also go to evazimet.com as well.
And Linktree as well. Eva Zimet on Linktree.
Okay. And you have a list of all of your things there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of, I like the format.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, Eva. This has been fantastic. And it was a genuine pleasure chatting with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.